What is going on, everyone? I'm Jimmy Don Kerr, and this is the SmallTown Collectibles YouTube channel. My guest today is a former financial blogger and comic book collector who made a splash onto the YouTube scene when he started the Comic Book Community Awards. We're going to talk about that and so much more coming up next. So sit back and relax and grab your popcorn as Brian-LCS answers 10 questions. Brian, welcome to 10 Questions, my friend. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on 10 Questions.
Cool, man. Glad to have you. Really appreciate Brian's support. I see him a lot on my channel. I see him a lot on everybody's channels, really commenting and things like that. And he definitely made a splash, I think, in the community when he started the Comic Book Community Awards. And we're going to talk about that today. But Brian, first question, as always on 10 Questions, is what or who got you into comic book collecting?
I don't really quite remember how I first picked up comic books. I was, since, probably 3 or 4 years old, always a superhero fan. I used to watch the Adam West Batman, on TV in the early 70s. I watched, Spider-Man, the 60s Spider-Man animated, and then Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And so I just always had a like for superheroes. And then at some point, it gravitated to books, to comic books.
Was that, as far as when you were young, did you read comic books or did that more come later?
I read some. I didn't really collect. It was more, when I became, a teenager, and when I had some money and that I actually started buying and collecting books.
Okay, cool. So how long ago did you start collecting? Like, I know for me it was like 16. Like it's pretty easy for me to kind of say here's when I started, because it was when DC Rebirth started, because I'm a DC fan. And I remember specifically that's when Rebirth came out. The day I walked into the comic book shop, it was, Rebirth had just come out. So I think that was 16. So how long have you been back into it?
So I initially started in the 80s. So I was probably 12 or 13. So 82, 83. And this was right before all of, probably like a few years before, Spider-Man and the black suit. And Spider-Man's my character. So I always collected, Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and then Web of Spider-Man came out, and then the McFarlane Spider-Man. So I was kind of right in that run. 252, the original Secret Wars. That was kind of my sweet spot. And I collected probably until 90, 91.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've been out for 30 years. So I got back in 2019 to 2020, where I was, going to the LCS, picking up books. And then I also found the YouTube community as well. So.
Sure. So as far as, getting back into it now, you go to the LCS. Do you have a pull list for yourself? Is that something that you're reading regular titles on a weekly basis?
Yes. Yeah. Initially when I first got back in, I didn't have a pull list. I didn't even know what a pull list was really, because when I collected in the 80s, it was 12 issues a year, one annual, not a lot of variant covers, no grading of comic books. So it was a steep learning curve for me when I came back in. And so I started going kind of weekly to the comic shop and realized like I was missing books because they were sold out. And then I was kind of introduced to the whole, pull list concept and, signed up. And so now, I still go every Wednesday, but now I have books that are waiting for me. So I'm not missing things.
Cool. Any specific titles you've gotten into? I'm sure, like you said, Spider-Man. Have you ventured into like the indie titles, or are you sticking more with like the big two?
No, I'm all over the place. I'm certainly Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man is the book I collect every week, or whenever it's out, and reading it. And they're publishing it now like 3 times a month, so it's quite frequently. And what I did was I kind of went back, because I hadn't read in a long time. I collected the current run, volume 5 of the Amazing Spider-Man from issue 1 that started in 2018 up to, where we are now. And I went back and read all of those books to kind of catch up on, where Spider-Man was from a story perspective. But it's interesting now watching content on YouTube is that I'm exposed to more books. People are making recommendations or saying this looks like a good read or maybe has some spec. So I'm certainly picking up books that I may not have in years past, based on recommendations that I'm hearing, or if I hear some storyline that might interest me, I'm picking it up. So certainly reading a lot of, I'm picking up DC. I'm traditionally a Marvel guy.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved Batman, but never really read his books. But I'm picking up more DC and certainly indie books as well.
That's cool. All right, so let's jump into question 2. Now, you were a financial blogger. We talked about that on Gary's channel in the hot seat with the usual suspects. And we'll get into that a little deeper here as 10 question goes on. But I want to just kind of venture into, like, you were doing the financial blog and then you decided, hey, I'm going to do a comic book based YouTube channel. Like, what brought you into YouTube with the comic book stuff?
Well, initially I was just starting to, get back into the hobby and started to find, I think actually the initial, I had books that I had collected from the 80s. So I had like 4 or 5 long boxes full of comics. And to be quite honest, my initial introduction back into comics was selling my books. So I started, because I've had these books and I've lugged them around from apartment to house to here and there. And, so because of COVID, I had some extra free time. I was working from home. I had some time to be able to kind of dig into these old books and really start to look at them and see what they were worth. I knew I had some key Spider-Man books. So I started digging in and I started listing some of those books on eBay. And so one of the first things I went to YouTube for was how to pack a comic book to ship it.
Mm-hmm.
So I found some videos on, how you can do it with a Gemini mailer, or you can, press it between cardboard and bubble wrap it. So that was really my first, there was a need. I needed some information. So I went to YouTube for it. And then as I was doing that search, I started to discover comic book, channels that were talking about comic books, talking about the Amazing Spider-Man. So that's when I started to watch more content. And then probably 5 or 6 months in, I was watching channels and seeing what they were doing, unboxings, and I said, well, I'm selling books on eBay, so I have at least a weekly piece of content because I'm selling books. I could kind of do a eBay recap of what sold and show my comic books. And I said, well, I think I could start my own channel, and at least I know I have one video that I can reproduce almost weekly. And that's really how it got started.
Cool. All right, so let's roll to question 3, and that brings us to the show that happened this past Saturday night, and that is the CBC Awards. So, what was the idea behind starting those awards?
So, and it really came out of, and you mentioned it, that I used to have a blog, a financial blog, a personal finance blog. And so that is another really niche community that I was involved in and still involved in, not as actively, but it's another niche community that has a big, a big base of people that have blogs and produce content on YouTube and social media and a lot of different platforms. And they had an awards for that, for the personal finance community. And so when I started to get involved on the YouTube side, I started looking around. I wasn't aware of any awards that anybody was doing, or any, in the past, and so I said, wow, this community is very active, very passionate, and creative. The content that's being created, whether it's an unboxing or whether it's like a skit video, a song, there's so much entertainment value to it. I said, an award show similar to what was done in the other niche community could translate here. And I was surprised that nobody was doing it. And so I said, well, let me see what I can do. Let me try to put this together, because I thought it would be a good idea to recognize all of the great work that everybody's doing.
Cool. So, question four. I know that you got some resistance, right? When you first put out that you were doing these awards, I think even on the award show, Chip Gettler presented you with an award
Right.
for taking the most crap of any YouTuber trying to start something good for the community. Can you talk specifically about what some of that pushback was? Like, what were people upset about?
Well, I think initially there were when we had a couple different phases, right? We had nominations, so voting was wide open. You could vote for any of your channels that you liked, and then once those votes were in, those nominations were in, they were totaled up, and we announced the finalist. And I think that's really when it started, when the finalists were announced, because um, a lot of people were talking about it, but there were a number of channels that were unaware of it. And so I think that was the initial criticism. Like, I knew nothing about this. I don't know who this guy Brian is. I don't know what he's doing. And so I think that was the initial, criticism. Like, what is this? Um, so, and it was, it was interesting to hear that, because I really thought it was a good thing. I've always looked at it from a positive perspective. I didn't really think that there would be negativity surrounding it. Um, but and then we kind of got past that. And I listened to a lot of it. I'd go back. Someone would tell me, "Hey, so and so mentioned the awards," and I would go watch the video. And it was certainly, there were some hurtful things towards me. And the biggest thing that bothered me was the attack on other channels, like saying other channels weren't worthy of a nomination. And when at the end of the day, we're creating content on YouTube for a hobby, for things that we enjoy. And so that I was confused by that. I was really like, why would you take shots at other people? Why make it personal, really? Because we're all doing this for fun. I know most of us have day jobs, and this is just a hobby. So that was the thing that I really didn't anticipate that people would really be angry about. And so that was really, there were certainly days where, and I think I've said it before, where, I offline, I was thinking about it a lot, and did I do the right thing? There were times I wanted, if I wanted to kick something, because it was certainly frustrating, because when you throw an idea out there and people don't receive it well, whether they, call you out by name or not, it certainly can, it can affect you. It can make you
Sure.
feel bad. But I said, look, I know my intentions were good. I want to move forward with this, regardless of, what people think. And there may be people out there that the awards isn't for them. And the more I've watched YouTube channels, there are certain channels that are all about, selling books, flipping books. It's more of their business. It's not really a hobby for them. And so that maybe the awards thing isn't for them. And that's fine. I don't expect that I'm going to make everybody happy with, the content that I produce, or the awards that I do. So at the end of the day, it was, I was able to kind of just, put it aside and just move forward with it.
So now that the awards are over, you've been through it. I know I heard you say last night, I think maybe to Reggie, who dominated the awards, that you had reached out initially to some channels for some feedback on what you were trying to do. Can you talk about what kind of feedback you were looking for, or what kind of feedback I guess you received?
Yeah, and really, and that was probably one of the things I did incorrectly. I could have reached out to more people, right? Um, I probably could have reached, if I reached out to 10 channels, I probably should have reached out to, 40 channels, or, more people, just to get their opinion. But I had the idea, and I wanted to validate the idea. I wanted to see if it was something that others thought was a good idea. So Reggie happened to be one of the channels I reached out to. I reached out to big channels, small channels. I reached out to some channels and never heard back from them. Um, But the feedback was like, wow, this. Generally, the feedback was, wow, this is a great idea. We don't, there are no current awards. It would be a good idea to recognize the community. So Reggie was probably the biggest channel that actually responded to me. But there were some other channels that we're, both familiar with. Gary B. I reached out to. I reached out to a few people, and everybody thought it was a good idea. And so that was enough for me. And the fact that Reggie, a big channel, liked the idea and was supportive of the idea, I said, okay, so I have a big channel and I have some medium-sized channels and some small channels that all think the idea is good. Let's move forward with it.
Cool. So I guess kind of looking back, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? So I think the idea is good. Like I liked it. I enjoyed the show. I can see where some of the criticism would come from, but as far as like really looking back, what would you do different? Give me like three things that maybe, obviously you said you would reach out to more channels than what you did, but is there anything else that you would do differently? Like come this year, if you're going to do this again, like what are some things that you're going to try to do different moving forward?
Well, yeah, I'm certainly going to try to get more people involved, right? Spread the word. That's the first thing. Make sure, I think obviously a number of channels know about it now, right? Whether they like the idea or not, they're aware of it. But the other thing is, I'm finding new channels every day, right? There are new channels that are coming on, and so there may be people out there that find it, tonight or tomorrow, or because of this interview, people might be now aware of it. So I think it will continue to grow every year. But the things I'm going to do differently are certainly, make sure I reach out. I want to get feedback from everybody now that we have a year under our belt. What worked, what didn't work, what categories were good. I want to get the community's feedback because ultimately it's celebrating the community. So I want to make sure that it's not just me, pulling, categories and how we do the voting and things like that. So I want to get everybody's feedback. I heard, some feedback last night. I have a few videos that I've asked for feedback on my channel. So people have been providing. So one of the things I think that we'll look at next year is maybe a way to group channels. So maybe it's by sub count or certain thresholds of sub count so that the channels that get nominated and that are up for an award are more grouped together like a like category. So maybe they're in the 1,000 to 2,000 sub range. That might be a category, or I don't know what it is, but there's some way of making it, because if my channel with 400 subs is going up against a channel that has 10,000 subs, well, just do the math, right?
You have no chance, right?
So trying to make it a little bit more fair, so you don't pit a small channel up against a large channel that maybe could never win just based on the audience engagement. So.
No, I mean, that makes sense. And that actually takes me to question 5 is, again, now that you've done the show, you've been through it for the year, what kind of changes already this early on into what you're going to do next year? Because I like the idea, because that was the biggest criticism that I heard, right? Like after last night, that was the biggest criticism I heard was that, look, Reggie, and Reggie's awesome. Like Reggie deserves every award he got, right? Reggie's a really cool cat. He's one of the kindest people in the community that I've met. I've interviewed him here on 10 Questions, and he was very, very kind, and I really like him. And he's a great member of the community. But you put Gary B, for example, up against Reggie. Gary B has no shot, right? And Gary B is equally as good a channel and equally as good a guy. And that was, you know what I'm saying?
Right. But I think that's the misconception, that I put Gary B against Reggie. I didn't. It was based on votes, right? I just collected the votes. So that was based on the votes. I think what we need to do is tweak that a little bit so that a channel size of Gary is not pitted against somebody, with a channel size of Reggie. That, I think, and that's been the feedback, is generally unfair because simple numbers. Right. Because if Gary only has 500 people watching, and 10% of those vote, that's 50 votes. If Reggie, has 10,000 people watching and 10% of that is 1,000. Well, how can Gary win? Right.
Right.
But I think that's one of the big misconceptions is people feel like I picked the names. It was an open vote. You could vote for any channel, and I just tallied the votes at the end of the day. So it's not me personally doing any of that, but as a creator of the awards, I have to do better in the fact that how can I um, compensate for that disparity in sub numbers, so we don't pit somebody who's could really never win against a larger channel.
Right. No, and that's what I was saying is it's, not that you would pick the channels because it was open vote and people got
Right.
selected. It's that if you're categorizing them and you've got a channel, and I'm using Gary B as an example because
Right.
he's my
Right.
boy, right? So, but, you take a channel like Gary B's and a community builder channel, or the community builder award. I mean, he started an entire movement, grow together.
Oh yeah.
So,
No, I know.
so he's a great community builder. So is Reggie. Reggie's a great community builder in his
Right.
own right. But when you pit them, like you said, math, it just doesn't work out. And so that was the biggest criticism I heard. And I like to hear from you that that's something that you're thinking about next year is maybe we bust this up into, subcategories to where it's people who have similar subcounts. So in a sense, you've got Reggie going against Bueller, Tom, Very Gary,
Right.
channels,
Right.
and Mint, channels like that. And you've got channels like myself, DJ Links, Gary B, they're all kind of in a similar, bucket. And I think that's a fair criticism of the award, but I also like that you're thinking about that too, as the creator of the award, that here's some things that we can do to make this better. Because I think the overall idea of it's actually really good. Like the idea behind it's really solid. And you don't know until you do these things how they're going to work out and what happens after you make these adjustments, and it becomes a really, really great thing for the community.
Yeah, I think it's just the growing pains of year one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there were certainly some flaws in the voting system that will look to improve, in year two. And like I said, I've been on the flip side of that where my blog was nominated and I've lost. So I know this thing of losing. I was nominated 3 times. I lost all 3 times. So, you have the high of the nomination and hopefulness of winning, and then you don't win. So it definitely stings a little bit. Although, like I said, it's supposed to be in good fun, but look, we're human, we all want to win. And when you don't, it definitely stings a little. So I understand that. And so, I think my job now moving forward for year two is to help make it more even, more fair, so we're pitting like channels against each other. And I don't want like to say pitting because it's not,
I know
in
what
my
you're
mind,
saying.
it's not a competition.
Right.
It's really just, like I said, to celebrate the community. So
Absolutely. No, and I think that's fair. I mean, what you said is fair. I think what your answer to that is good. Anything else, now that you've done the show, anything else, besides, maybe, grouping the channels in, more similar sub counts, so that you have a chance for more winners essentially in different categories or size of channel. But anything else that you've seen as far as feedback from the show last night, that you want to change maybe going forward?
yeah, I think tweaking some of the award categories. Maybe we have an international category, right? Because there's a bunch of great,
Absolutely.
Australian and Europe channel, so maybe an international category, so that we're not pitting United States based channels against European or international channels. I think that that's one. Maybe some type of art category, right? We have a lot of talented artists in the community that maybe they're not doing comic book art, but they're doing original art, so maybe we add that type of category. So definitely want to look at the categories. And I think we see changes over the years. So maybe there's a new category that pops up. Maybe people start doing certain things. Maybe we add an overall collectible category. Maybe because there are a lot of coin collectors, stamp collectors,
Sure.
pop collectors. There are a lot of collectors of other things than comic books. So maybe we add a general, collectible category where we can tie in some of those other niches, because a lot of those collectible channels, pop figures, coin, they're all supportive of one another. So it would be great to be able to include them in as well. I certainly don't want to exclude anybody, but I also have to be, realistic that I don't want to have, 50 award categories.
Right.
We had 11 this year. Maybe it grows to 15 or 18 or 20, but um, I think what people forget is that generally I'm running this by myself, and this is a hobby for me. And so this is, just like a number of us, I'm doing this in my free time. I'm spending my own money. I paid for all of the awards. I had a few donations. A few people donated books, for prizes, but generally, it's my time and my dime. So, I couldn't see it growing to, like I said, 30 categories, unless I'm able to bring on a sponsor and bring on some additional help so that I don't have to do everything by myself. And I did have a lot of help. There was a small committee that helped, validate the votes. Like I said, received a bunch of donations. You saw on the live show last night that a bunch of community members provided original content for the show. So I don't want to be like, look at me, look at all the things I did. There was certainly a lot of help, and I'm thankful for everybody that did. But I'm hopeful that it will grow even further next year. Where we'll have more involvement from the community to make it even bigger and better.
Fantastic, man. Like I said, I think in all, I think it's a good idea. I see us in 10 years. We're all meeting out in LA at the Staples Center, and we're all going in for our YouTube awards, and hopefully getting nominated and winning some more. No, I mean, like I said, I think it's a cool idea, and I've learned about a lot of channels that I otherwise didn't know about. To be honest with you, kind of through it, and so I think it's cool, man. I think the overall idea is cool. And like I said, as long as you're looking at tweaking it and trying to make it better, which I believe you are, you seem like that type of guy that's earnest in what he's trying to do. I think it'll be cool. All right. So question 6 is actually like the show itself. I watched it last night. I watched almost all of it. Who was I watching? I watched Georgia, Alabama, and then I was watching Michigan, Iowa, I think, on football.
Oh, okay.
I knew that was coming
Big
on.
football
So
night last night. Yeah.
yeah. So it was, that was, my wife said, "You're living your best life today, aren't you?" I was like, absolutely. I had to go down. We have this Christmas in the Mountains thing here. And then I come home and literally watched football all day. Great day. Worked on some YouTube content of my own, kind of finishing up the list for first appearances and key issues, and picking the books for a new comic book down a budget, all that stuff. Anyway, come across the award show. Very well done, very clever. Like for you doing the show, like how much planning had to go into that as far as actually doing the show itself?
Well, the biggest thing was just, I just didn't want it to be the announcement of the awards. I wanted to have some community involvement, other videos. I wanted to create some original content myself for the show. So yeah, and that's kind of how I spaced out the, so the nominations or the voting for the finalists ended a few weeks ago. So that gave me enough time to, review all the votes and then create all the content and how the show would run. And I had reached out to a number of other creators, months ago to ask them, would they be interested in producing a video? And some did, some didn't, some got me some stuff last minute. But it all worked out. And that's really what I want it to be. The awards is, yes, we're revealing winners, but we're also highlighting the community and the talent and the creativeness in the community. And I did a couple, skits that, kind of Freaky Louie type skits, Saturday Night Live type skits that, that I did myself. That is kind of a little bit different than content that I generally produce. But I wanted, like I said, I wanted to make it fun. I wanted to kind of poke fun at it a little bit. But yeah, there was certainly a lot of planning, and it was strange. I've been sick the last like 2 weeks leading up to it, and so I was getting worried that because my voice was hoarse, I had a sore throat, so I was getting worried that I wasn't going to be able to get everything done. But ultimately everything worked out, and I'm hopeful that the community liked the show, liked seeing the other channels and the videos that were produced, as well as revealing the winners.
No, it was a lot of fun. And like any good award show, it had a technical problem.
Yes.
I think every good award show has one of those problems. Brian went black for about 5 minutes there. We got the Black Album, which was funny. And even myself, there was a couple. I think he was listening to these songs like all these cool guys. Like K Titus. Everybody Needs a Vet. All the whack comic stuff. Freaky Louie. It was even listed, SmallTown Collectibles. You got Jimmied, that was on there. The future content coming from me. One question, all that stuff was really clever. Like I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed your Matt Foley. Like all that stuff was a lot of fun. So was it stressful? Like sitting there, like trying to run the show, or you're like, hey, I'm just doing content and let's roll.
No, it really was. I was certainly a little nervous going into it, but then once I got into it, but the technical difficulty piece, the black screen was just like, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. I've used StreamYard, 100 times and have never run into this. Of course, tonight I have to run into an issue. But other than that, other than the technical issue, once I got into it, it kind of flowed. I'm hopeful that I haven't watched it. I need to go back and watch it now. I'm hopeful, and I saw a bunch of comments. People were laughing, and it looked like they were having a good time.
Yeah, the chat was having a good time.
Yeah, so and that was really the goal, right? Just to make sure I have a fun event and that people had a good time. That was that was the ultimate goal.
Cool. No, it was cool. I was interested to know too. Like I noticed that you had some of the channels actually came on right while you were doing it. If they were nominated for an award, they came on. Did you reach out to all the channels to come on?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I started a group chat on Instagram probably 2 weeks ago and let them know, look, here's the live stream, or maybe it was about maybe a week or so ago. I didn't want to do it too far out, but once I set up the live stream, just kind of scheduled it within, StreamYard and YouTube. I created an Instagram chat, sent it out and said, look, here's the live stream. Here's the order in which the awards will be revealed. If you'd like to join, please join. And a lot of people were into it. The one thing I didn't anticipate was having, I kind of had in the back of my mind, like, the Oscars, right? When they show the 5, nominated actors, and then, the winners announced, and that a winner does the speech. The one thing I didn't anticipate, with StreamYard is having the people that didn't win on screen, like their reaction. And, that's tough because, like I said, I've been on the other side of that where, you don't win, and it certainly stings a little bit. So, but I wanted to make it spontaneous. I obviously there were only a handful of people that knew who the winners were. The committee that helped me validate the awards, the votes. So I didn't know how to do that, right? So that might be an improvement that we do maybe next year, maybe something different. Because it could be awkward if you lose and you're on camera. There's like I said, there's disappointment. So I get that. So that might be something that I try to tweak as well. But I don't want to reveal winners ahead of time. I want it to be part of the live show.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So no, we'll end it there as far as the CB Awards go.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea, man, and I think it ultimately will bring the community together with a few tweaks. And I think you recognize that, and I think that moving forward, I think it'll be a good thing. So it was fun. Like I said, it was fun to watch. It sure was. I mean, like I said, and for content creators, I can see the disappointment. Like I said, I'm friends with a lot of these guys that got nominated, right? And and I can see that. So no, but I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is a good thing. So let's go to questions. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to say I'm still friends with the channels that lost.
Too, I'm sure you are. Yeah, I'm sure you are. All these guys are good dudes, man. Like I said, you're right.
It's a good community. So
yeah, it is. So all right, so let's go to question 7, and I want to talk about your previous blog. Your financial blog, and we talked a little bit about this in the hot seat with Gary on Gary B's channel. But I want to talk a little bit more about the blog and how that got started. So, can you tell the audience what led you down that path?
Sure. It was really out of a need. My family and I, my wife and I, we really never had a financial plan, right? So making money, living paycheck to paycheck, using credit cards to buy things, finance vacations, um, and just really never had a plan for how we managed money, and really never had any formal education on personal finance. My parents taught me the basics, back in the day, how to balance a checkbook and things like that, but never really had any, experience or, formal training on money. And so thought, well, we're doing like everybody else. We have a credit card. We pay the monthly payment. Our financial plan was really, if we managed our, credit card payments each month, that was our financial plan. We were doing good. But what happened was that kind of snowballed. We had one credit card, and then we had two, and then we had three, and ultimately we had five. And we were overspending every month using credit cards, and ultimately got to a point in our lives after 10 or 11 years of just overspending, living beyond our means, that we ended up racking up over $100,000 of consumer debt. And I was sitting down to plan a summer vacation. Typically the family would take a summer vacation, and basically had no money in the bank, no cash, no savings, and basically was maxed, uh, almost maxed on all five credit cards, so to the credit limit. And so I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll just call the credit card companies, and I'll get a credit increase, and I'll pay for the summer vacation, and we'll go on our way." And I called each of the five credit card companies, and they said, "Nope, you have too much debt. We're not going to increase your credit line." And that was kind of my rock bottom aha moment, as a dad, and as somebody who I was, managing the finances in the house. Like, I felt like I let my family down, that I couldn't take them on a vacation. And so I said, there's got to be a different way. We're doing something wrong. We make, very good money, and we have all of this debt. So something's got to change. And so I started doing some research. I started saying, well, what can I? There's got to be a get out of debt quick, formula that I can use. And I stumbled across Dave Ramsey, and I started listening to his podcast. I read his book, The Total Money Makeover. And I realized that, we dug ourselves a hole, and now we had to dig ourselves out. And that if we made some changes in how we were doing things with our money, that we could accomplish this. And, I heard other stories through, um, Ramsey's book and on his podcast, of people with more debt than we had, less debt than we had, less income than we had, all getting their, finances together. And so I was on board. Like, I was hooked, like, we can do this. And so I brought it to my wife. We had a conversation about it. You know, we it was tough then to get rid of those. We cut up the five credit cards, but it was tough because it was our safety net for so many years. Not having any savings, cash savings, we were using credit cards. When the car broke down, when the dishwasher blew up, or whatever the case may be. So it was a humbling, moment. To now, I was 40 years old, and to say, I need to learn a new skill on how to manage money. I need to tell my kids that we're not going on our typical, summer vacation this year, and here are the reasons why mom and dad messed up, and we need to learn how to manage our money better. And so that was kind of the rock bottom moment, and we moved forward from there. And then somewhere along the way, I started a blog because I felt the power in it, being getting our finances together, and I knew there were lots of other people that were in similar situations. And so if I could share, our journey, our story, and maybe help somebody along the way, and that was really, so then I started a blog, a personal blog, and basically, chronicled our story out of $100,000 worth of debt.
Cool. So did that kind of take a life? I mean, I don't understand how the blog thing works, to be honest with you. I was semi interested in that. Is like, how did you just started blogging like on a website? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So I basically created a website. The website, I don't run it today. It's still up and running. It's called Debt Discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started blogging. I started talking about topics, things that we were doing, how we were, cutting back, how we were building a budget for the first time. And so I just basically started writing articles a couple times a week and chronicling it on the blog. And then, I had other people that started reading it and reaching out. And then, like I said, I was introduced to, when I started doing research and found Dave Ramsey, I started to find other personal finance blogs, other people in similar situations that were maybe in, consumer debt or student loan debt, and that they were blogging about it. And so, similar to the comic book community, there's this personal finance community with people sharing things that they're doing and tips. And so I started reading a lot of those other blogs and following other stories of people in similar situations.
Cool. So I want to kind of bring this over to the comic book community and question 8. I do this segment, each week, or I started, called Comics on a Budget, right? Where I try to give you the top 5 picks for New Comic Book Day if you're on a budget of $25 a week, right? So that's 5 books generally. And if your comic book store gives you a discount, then you can probably pick up 6. But I've kind of modified it to where it's basically 5 books. So last week was the first time I couldn't hit that $25. Like, because the books that were coming out, the ones that you should buy that I thought were probably the best, were like $9 a piece, right? So I could not hit it. And and it kind of brought you to mind, and the conversation we had on In the Hot Seat about, your experience with financial, planning, or not planning, but, personal finance. And then us in the comic book community trying to stay within a budget, right? So I wanted to kind of tie those two together with you if we could, and talk a little bit about maybe some advice. You've done this, like some advice for folks in the comic book community about staying on a budget with your comics that you purchase. Could you speak to that a little bit? I mean, maybe some advice?
Well, and that was one of the things that I initially found when I started watching content, YouTube content. You see these rooms, these comic book rooms, and all of these slabs and toys and things behind people. And I started to cringe because I'm like, I hope they're managing their money well, because I know that if you're not aware of it and not, on top of it, all of those great toys behind you could be bankrupting you or causing issues with your significant other or your spouse because you're spending way too much money. Or maybe you're putting on a credit card and you're paying high interest. And so that was one of the first things I noticed, like, just because of my background and where I came from, was like, oh, wow, I hope they're doing the right thing with their money. And I think it's just important. You have to have a plan. And that's what we learned over the years, is you have to have a plan for your money. It's okay to spend it on comic books or pop figures or eating out or whatever is a priority in your life. But you have to make sure that you're not sacrificing the needs, the rent money, the food money. You have to make sure all of those things are covered. And if there's something left over, then that's what you can use to, spend on your hobby or eating out or coffee or whatever your vice is. But you have to build a plan. You have to be aware of it. And so just to walk into a comic shop and drop down a credit card and spend, a couple $100 and not understand how that ties into your financial picture, scares me for other people. I don't have a credit card. So I budget, the amount of money I'm going to spend, when I walk into the LCS. It's accounted for. There's a budget line in my overall budget. So I know that, if something happens, if, the car breaks down this week and I may need to cut back in other areas to cover that cost. So it's really just awareness And, people say, oh, it's the B word. The budget is like, well, that's restrictive. I can't spend. Well, you can. You just have to plan for it. You have to be, aware of it. If you want to go on a summer vacation, well, then you should be saving money throughout the year to be able to, to go on that vacation. Or if you want to have a great, crazy Christmas, that's fine. Just plan for it and save your money. Don't get caught up in using credit cards and then say, oh, I'll worry about it in January.
No,
It's
I
just,
mean, I think that's great advice, really. I mean, as far as that's something when I started doing comics on a budget, I started looking at the books differently. Normally I was just kind of rolling in. My budget's a little different than others, but kind of roll in. I can buy for the most part what I want, but I still have to budget. Like, I mean, hell, there's so much good stuff that comes out every week that, I mean, literally you could walk into the LCS and drop $250. Like,
oh
could.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's easily done. And so I think that piece of it is important. And I'm in finance myself. I actually teach Dave Ramsey quite a bit to my customers.
Okay.
I don't do it as much anymore. My staff does it. But anyway, I've taught Dave Ramsey for years to my customers. I think that's an important piece. And for us collectors, I'm like you, you kind of look around, you're like, okay, how are they affording all that?
Right.
I hope, it's something that comes to my mind too. So no, I think those two things together. I appreciate you taking time answering that question. So let's go to question 9. And I was just wondering, where you had been through the financial difficulties, you started the blog, you've done all that, and now you're kind of hopping back into comic books. Like, how does your family feel about it? Like, do they like the hobby? Are they into it? Like, your wife, does she care?
So my wife really doesn't. She doesn't care. She likes that I have enjoyment out of the hobby, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she's been a few times. We've been out shopping or running errands, and I'm like, hey, I want to stop by the comic shop. She'll come in with me and she'll look around, but she has no interest. She's a very good sport. She's watched probably all of the Marvel, all of the superhero movies. She'll sit in with us. I think one Mother's Day we went and saw the Hulk. And she was like, well, this Mother's Day, what are we doing here watching the Hulk? So she's a good sport, but she has no interest. My kids, so I have 3 kids, and two sons and a daughter. And my daughter is probably the biggest comic book fan out of all 3. Both my sons have different interest they're into anime and video games. And they are certainly into the MCU. They've seen a number of the movies, but my daughter is probably the one who reads more comics and than any, besides me. She's kind of the big fan, which I find interesting because it just, you just think, oh well, one of my sons would be the one, but she happens to be the one. So, we'll catch up and like we're talking about Hawkeye. What did you think? What did you think of the episode? What do you think this means? I can have those conversations with her, and to some degree with my sons, but they have like I said, slightly different interests. But like I said, I think my wife, as long as she was laughing at me with my tuxedo shirt and the award, she not laughing, but she was supportive. She helped me do a few things for it, but she generally doesn't have any interest in it.
No, well, mine neither. Like my wife could care less. And my daughter, I have 2 daughters, and neither one of them really care either. But my youngest daughter does show signs of being a collector. It's just not comic books necessarily. Now she enjoys, like she watched Hawkeye with me. We watched episode 3 last night, and we talked about that. She's really enjoying Hawkeye. It's truly been one of the best, I think, Disney Plus shows that have come out. Like, I really like it. I think it's really good, and I've enjoyed it with my daughter. But yeah, I always like to ask that question, or I'll ask it sometimes because, especially kind of coming through that, like the personal finance stuff, having a hobby, that's where a lot of times if you're having to take, peel money back for something else that happened, that's where it has to happen.
Right. And, my wife has things that she enjoys that, we look at it together and say, all right, well, I'm going to spend, X amount of dollars on comic books. You can spend X amount of money on, whatever it is, getting your hair done, your nails, or whatever it may be. And so it's really just about planning and being on the same page, with your spouse.
Right. No, great advice, man. All right. So, question 10, last question, the softball question, but it interests me. Like, I was interested to know what kind of music you like. Like, what kind of music is Brian-LCS into?
I listen to a lot of different types. The one genre that I do not like is country. I'm
I've
just
heard that a lot in the community. I live in the country, so everybody here
yeah, yeah.
likes country music except for me. But, there's some of it I do like still.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the new country or I mean,
Oh, bro country sucks. Like, no doubt. Like, this new country, this bro country is not, I hate it.
but I'm like some of the classics like Willie Nelson, that type of country. I've listened to Charlie Daniels band, that type of stuff. But country is really just probably my least favorite genre. I am a big, huge U2 fan. I've
Really?
seen U2 probably 10, 12 times. Right up at the stage, Bono right in front of me. My wife and I are big, big, big U2 fans. We've seen them in Vegas and LA, New York. We've seen them all over. They're one of my favorite bands. The Joshua Tree came out when I was in high school, and that was just a big album. And then we've always been, followed them, their career and all of their music tours. They're just my favorite. So alternative music is generally my favorite genre. But I grew up on classic rock, Led Zeppelin, The Who. So and then New York. I live in New York, so big rap movement in the 80s. A lot of friends listening to rap music. So Run DMC, Public Enemy. I listen to pretty much all, but favorites certainly U2. Um, but I'll listen to Metallica. There's not much music that I don't enjoy listening to.
No, that's one of the things when I ask that question. We all kind of dig everything. I mean, it's just, and a lot of it has to do with your era when you grew up. Like, I grew up in the 80s, but also like the early 90s when the alt rock movement started, or, what do you call the Seattle bands,
Right. The grunge. Yeah.
SDP, grunge. Yes, thank you. Nirvana, those bands. Like, that was when I was in college, like
Right.
late high
Right.
school, early college. That's when those guys came out. So those are some of my favorites because that's when I was truly, truly into music. And so, yeah, but I get that a lot. I don't like today's country either, really. My girls like it. My girls, I listen to a lot of today's music just because my daughters, they're into music too. So they listen to that stuff. But yeah, no, we could definitely sit in the car together and listen to music. We wouldn't have a problem. So, so man, that's the 10 questions, Brian. Thank you so much for coming on, brother. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too.
I did. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. No, I do appreciate it. And, we'll see bigger and better things for 2022 for our channels and for the comic book community awards. So
absolutely, man. I can't get behind that anymore. I think that everybody's going to have a good year. I'm looking forward to the year. Bunch of us, for people watching, stay tuned. There's going to be a bunch of us in Chicago for C2E2. Really looking forward to that and seeing what happens when we take over Chicago for a few days. So
shenanigans, I'm sure.
Yes, so for sure. But guys, I'll put Brian's stuff down in the description below. Make sure you go check out his channel. Sub him up. He's got a lot of good content, not just the CBC Awards, which is what we kind of focused on here today, but he's got a lot of other good content. He's a phenomenal supporter of the community. So go check his stuff out. Give him a follow on YouTube as well as IG or any other social media platforms that he is on. All right. So before we end this thing, just a couple of things. Make sure you stay tuned. Like I said, next week there's going to be a lot of content coming from C2E2 from all the different channels. Also, my discount code with Street Level Hero LA. Got to make sure I always bring that up here at the end of the show, where you get 10% off your order with the code STC10. But JPG over at Street Level Hero LA donates 25% of the total order to the American Cancer Society for cancer research. So phenomenal cause there. So guys, make sure you go check out Brian. Go check out the CBC Awards. It was this past Saturday, but you can go to Brian's channel and watch that. It was a lot of fun. It was funny. His Matt Foley impersonation is really good. So absolutely enjoyed that. That's it, guys. Appreciate you guys coming and hanging out here on the channel for a little bit. This has been 10 Questions.